believe in the gun. And our players don't use it most days. They use it every day.
In my 20 years as head coach, I've used the gun every single year. Well, my dream as a coach that everybody would grow up with the gun, because getting all those reps would make my job a lot easier.
Good morning, everyone. This is the NABC Championship webinar series. My name is Tom McDonald. I'm the 2-year college coach rep for the board of directors. We got Troy Hilton, who's been with the NABC for, Troy, how is it, 28 years?
Yes, 28.
28 years. We'd like to thank you especially for all your time. This is, I think, number 81 webinar. Special thanks to Jim Haney, Reggie Mitten, Troy Hilton again for everything he's done, Eric Weberg, Rick Letty, Mark Heatherman, but I could go on, Wade, the whole staff. They've been just so helpful and encouraging. The Gun for sponsoring these events, and then the Sideline Interactive is going to give away a table. I think it's Friday is the drawing after Bill Self, one of Coach Larry Brown's proteges. One table, 8 feet long, LED, free shipping. It's over $11,000 value. Someone's going to win. Craig Reed for all the marker boards and magnetic boards that he sent out to all the coaches that were kind of quarantined. Mike Bray, past president of the NABC. Jamie Dixon for the current president. Both of them were speakers, actively involved in all of this. So we greatly appreciate their support and assistance. The entire board of directors for the NABC, they have been nothing but encouraging and positive in their time and effort in social media. Championship Productions, Bill Bergen, Nate Landis, Daryl Bennett. Now it's my distinct honor to bring back our next speaker. He was unbelievable the first time we had him on. We kind of ran out of some time due to some technical issues, but he was gracious enough to stay on even longer. Long Beach, New York. And then he went to North Carolina. He was the 7th round draft pick of the Baltimore Bullets. Playing career was 1967 to 72. He's a point guard. Coaching career, 1969 to 2018. And I think he could still coach right now. So if there's anybody out there needing a coach for this fall, you may want to get a hold of Coach. His career history as a player, the New Orleans Buccaneers, Coach, I don't remember them. The Oakland Oaks, I don't remember them, but I remember the Washington Caps and the Virginia Squires. I remember them, and the Denver Rockets. I remember all those. I have basketball cards from them. As a coach, he was an assistant at North Carolina. Then he went to the Carolina Cougars, and then he went to the Denver Nuggets, and then he was at UCLA, and then to the Nets, Kansas, University of Kansas from 83 to 88, the Spurs, the Clippers, and then, sorry, Coach, I had to turn the page.
You can stop there.
The Pacers, he had a great run at the Pacers, and then the 76ers, unbelievable, and then he won the NBA championship with the Detroit Pistons in 2003 to 5. And that game, like we talked last time, was just on. Then he went to the Knicks, the Charlotte Bobcats, and then SMU brought that program back. Last time he was there was 2012 to 16. Coach, I could go on and on accolades. You've done things that no one else has done. You've had players and coaches leave and do unbelievable things in the NBA and in the college game, and then also in the NBA as a coach too. So welcome to the broadcast and the webinar.
It's great to be with you guys again. I love talking about basketball and sharing what I was taught.
Well, one thing I do want to say is Coach solved the riddle of Zoom today. So we're all together, and he did a great job. Coach, my first question is this. When you went from a long history of MBA or ABA and then to the time the Denver Nuggets, when you were there, were they still the MBA, the first years of the MBA, or were they still ABA?
We were ABA. What happened, I was coaching the Cougars. That was my first head coaching job with Doug Moe. And the team was sold by Mr. Ted Munchak to the Spirits of St. Louis. And he gave the Spirits every asset except for Doug and myself. And at that time, I was coaching a USA basketball team overseas. And Carl Scheer, who was the general manager of the Cougars, took the Denver Nuggets job, and he told them that Doug and I would join them. And at that time, Doug and I had heard from the Boston Celtics. When John White Brown owned the Celtics, he was the owner of Kentucky Fried Chicken at the time. And Carl had already told the ownership of Denver that Doug and I were coming. So we ended up joining the Nuggets before they merged with the NBA. The ABA had 11 teams and then went down to 7 teams. And then eventually 4 teams, about 2 years later, were taken into the NBA. It was the Pacers, the Nuggets, the Spurs, and New York Nets or New Jersey Nets. I'm not sure exactly what the name was at the time.
Well, you were with Dean Smith in 65 to 67. Then John Wooden is still around the program at UCLA. I just wondered, how much interaction did you have with Coach Wooden when you took over the reins of UCLA?
Well, I was the third one. Gene Bartow, I think followed Coach, and then I got a call from the AD, J.D. Morgan, after Bartow resigned and went somewhere. And then he said, Larry, if Gary Cunningham, who's our assistant, doesn't take the job, I want you to come to UCLA. And I had never heard from Mr. Morgan, had no idea he even knew who the hell I was. And Gary Cunningham took over for a couple of years. And lo and behold, I just left Denver and I got a call from JD and he offered me the UCLA job. And Coach Wooden was always around. At that time, they didn't have offices in Pauley Pavilion. They had an annex. And actually, my office was right next to Coach Wooden's. And he used to come almost every day. He used to walk. And I was in awe of him, obviously. And I tried to pick his brain as much as I could. And he was very gracious to me. And, when you go from Coach McGuire and Coach Smith and then some of the other coaches that I was involved with, they all had an influence on me. But, Coach Wooden, the way he taught was entirely different. He had that 2-1-2 zone. And great athletes, a lot of times undersized. We remember Walton and Kareem, but his first national championship in '64, I think Fred Slaughter and Keith Erickson at 6'5", 6'6" were the 2 biggest guys he had on his team, and they went undefeated with Walt Hazzard and Gail Goodrich on that team. But he was a really good resource for me, which, I always wish young coaches would understand there's a lot of older guys out there, especially at this time, that could really help them expand their game. And, they're all willing to give back.
Coach, my next question before I turn over to Troy is, so how was it to merge that program of John Wooden era and Gary Cunningham, who was with and Coach Bartow and all, and then when you came in, kind of bringing your own stamp on the program, how tough was that culture-wise?
Well, I was the third coach, for most of these guys. We had a big senior class. I think we had 5 guys. Kiki Vandeweghe and James Wilkes were the two best, but of the 5 guys in the senior class, they were all 6'7" or over. We had one junior and basically one sophomore, and we brought in 4 freshmen. And I broke every record, that could be imagined when I went to UCLA. We lost our opening game in Pauley. That was the first time it ever happened. We lost to DePaul on national TV, when they had Aguirre and Cummings and Teddy Grubbs. Coach Myers was the coach there. I was the first coach to lose 2 in a row at Pauley. I was the first coach to lose to SC at Pauley. We came in 3rd in the conference, 3rd or 4th, I think, and it was the first time that conference had ever had a bunch of teams in the NCAA and rated in the top 10. Arizona State, Washington State, and Oregon State were all top 10 teams, and we came in 4th. We were lucky enough to make the NCAA tournament, and lo and behold, by some miracle, we went to the final game and ended up losing in a real good game to Louisville, who was coached by Denny Crum, who most people felt should have been the one to follow Coach Wooden because he was on their staff, and they're probably right.
Troy, go ahead.
Hey, Coach. Well, don't tell Coach Crum, but I love that UCLA team. My favorite player was Rocket Rod Foster.
Yeah, we were, I think, 7-5 in the middle of the season that year. And Larry Farmer, who remained on the staff with me, I had Larry Farmer and Kevin O'Connor with me, and Greg Impelman, who married Coach Wooden's granddaughter. And when we were 7-5, I went to Larry and I said, what am I doing wrong? What would Coach Wooden have done? He said, well, you're trying to, put in your style, and these guys, you're the 3rd coach. They used to run in UCLA's high post offense and, 2-1 press after made field goals and made free throws, and you're trying to get these guys to play a style of play that they've never been used to, and you're playing the wrong guys. You're trying to play the older guys when some of our better players are the freshmen. And I had this silly question. I said, well, how many guys did Coach Wooden play? He said, Larry, at that time they had 15 guys that were on scholarship on the varsity and 5 guys on the freshman team. He only played 7. And he had 4 players that played up front, 2 guys could play center, and 3 guys in the backcourt. And, at that time, most people were playing a 2-guard front, and we didn't have point guard, shooting guard. And I said, well, how did he keep the other guys happy? He said, well, they only played when we were 30 points down or 30 points ahead, and we never were 30 points down. And I said, well, wow, what do you think I should do? And he said, well, why don't you go and teach the high post offense, the UCLA high post offense, and, keep some of your values defensively, and we'll figure it out. So we went up to Notre Dame, and at that time, UCLA played Notre Dame once a year, and Digger was coaching Notre Dame, and they used to have a big pep rally before they played UCLA, and we were still playing conference games. We flew up, and we had Notre Dame, in a really tight game, and I decided to play the freshmen, and we almost won. We lost a very close game late to a great team, and lo and behold, from then on, we just got better and better and better, and ended up going to the final game in the NCAA with 4 freshmen playing, and a center named Michael Sanders, who was 6'5.5", who was a sophomore, hardly played. It was just an amazing, amazing turnaround.
you were with the Carolina Cougars and the Denver Nuggets, and then they approached you about this UCLA job. Was getting into college always your intent, or did they talk to you and it became a good idea?
No, I always wanted to be a college coach. I really wanted to be a high school coach. My dream was to be a history teacher and coach baseball, basketball, and football in the high school level. I said it before, I used to read Chip Hilton books, and they had a coach named Rockwell who did the same thing. And Chip Hilton was an amazing athlete. And the writer of that series was Claire B., that I think might have the highest winning percentage of any college coach in our history. And that was my goal. And my high school coach was a big influence. And but by some strange accident, I went to Goodyear to play. And then Coach Smith asked me to come back to North Carolina. And at that time, they had a freshman team, and there was only 3 coaches. It was Coach Smith and John Lotz and myself. So Coach let me coach the freshman team, but I had to be at every varsity practice. And at 26, I was offered the Connecticut job, and I turned it down. The football coach at North Carolina got the AD's job at Connecticut, followed Fred Shabel, who became the AD at Penn. And I turned it down, and Coach Smith said, "You're crazy, Larry. You're not going to get an opportunity like this." And I said, "Coach, I'm learning more being with you, and I feel more comfortable preparing in this way." So I stayed the next year, and then the ABA started. And the New Orleans Buccaneers, wanted Doug Moe to play for them. Doug was playing in Europe. And Doug said, "The only way I'll sign is if Larry Brown comes with me." And I walked in to Coach, and I said, "Coach, I'm going to leave Carolina, and I'm going to go in the ABA and play." And he said, "Larry, you'll never get a job if you do this. You're in a perfect situation." We had a great freshman team, and everything was starting to turn around at Carolina. We had just gone to the Final Four. And I said, "Coach, someday I won't be able to play, and this is an opportunity for me." So I ended up going to New Orleans on Doug's coattails. Played a couple of years, got offered the Davidson job, and I took that for a while, and some things didn't work out. And I called Coach, and I said, "Coach, I'm going to go back to playing." And he said, "Larry, if you leave Davidson, you'll never get another job." And I said, "Coach, I think I still want to play." And he said, "Stay 1 year at Davidson. They have an amazing team coming back. You get any job you want." But I didn't listen to him. I went back and played. I played for the Cougars, and then they went to St. Louis. But my original team, New Orleans, was moved to I was traded to Oakland. Oakland moved to Washington. Washington moved to Virginia. And I went with them, all those times. But the ABA was an amazing experience. And, the coaches I got to work under were unbelievable. Dean Smith and Coach McGuire taught me, and Alex Hannum and Dave McCarthy in the ABA, having Doug with me. It was just amazing experience. But I wanted to be a college coach or a high school coach, because I thought, my strength was to teach, and I wanted to be, follow what Coach Smith had done in terms of having relationships with ex-players and their families. And I thought college would afford me more of an opportunity to impact lives and be close to kids and have more time actually to practice, which is something that I love.
Coach, so when all those ex-players or past players from UCLA time were around, like when we did the videos with Dean Smith, like during that time we were there, there was players, ex-players coming in all the time. So did you have a lot of influx of UCLA players coming back and just hanging around the program, or were most of those guys gone because of the NBA?
Most of the guys were gone playing, but the ones that were around were great. Mike Warren, he was on a TV series forever, was in my office daily. And a lot of the players were around. I remember we had a big banquet where all the old players came to celebrate Coach Wooden. And I got to meet them all. But at that time, if you looked at UCLA's rosters, especially in the later years, every one of them were in the NBA, but basically playing and playing at a really high level. I developed a relationship with Bill Walton, later on, that was unbelievable. I played on the Olympic team with, Walt Hazzard, and developed a relationship with him, and he ended up becoming a coach at UCLA. And actually, Larry Farmer stayed on my staff, and with Kevin O'Connor, and Larry was a tremendous asset to me because UCLA, which cracked me up. When I first got the job, I went into Pauley Pavilion, and the only banners they had showing were the championship banners. Now you go around college arenas, they show you the times teams went to the NIT or the NCAA or won a conference championship. They only had NCAA banners. I think they had 10 of them up there. And I remember calling Mr. Wooden and asking Coach, I said, where do you keep your NCAA championship trophies? And they were in a bowling alley. And it only looked like they had two because they had them lined up one after another, and you could only see the first two. And I remember calling Coach Smith and saying, Coach, you won't believe this, but they have all these championship, trophies and the NCAA banners showing. And we had only one at that time at Carolina. In 1957, Coach McGuire went 32-0, and they beat at Michigan State in triple overtime in the semifinals at Kansas City, and Wilt Chamberlain at Kansas in triple overtime. And I told Coach, they don't even display their championship trophies.
Coach, I got a couple questions here from people. This coach was at a 5-star camp that you were at in 1983, and you gave us a story regarding to him being 6 foot and having big hands for his height. He proceeded to talk about hand strength and how important it was to make sure your fingers were strong so it would help you shoot and passing. Have you ever preached that again?
Well, my whole thing, when I went out to recruit, I told the coaches that were on my staff to recruit, let's look for kids that have no necks, that have long arms and big hands, and are split high, which I mean have long legs. Because that was Coach Wooden's philosophy. He wanted athletic kids, long and athletic kids. And hands, to me, the most important thing about hands is the ability to catch the ball. You see a lot of times now, we have a lot of African kids coming to the United States, and a lot of big kids, and a lot of people question their hands. Well, these kids all grew up playing soccer. Every sport we grew up, basically, you pass and catch. And, but I remember Coach Smith telling me at an early age that, basketball IQ was really important. Athleticism was important because he felt if you were an athlete and made a mistake, you could cover quickly. But he wanted guys that could catch and pass. And he always was on us to look for kids that had high IQs and that could catch the ball.
The next one's lends itself right to what Troy and I are doing for the future, Coach. It says, Coach Brown, do you conduct clinics So, Coach, I'm asking you to speak at one of our clinics when this pandemic's over, okay? So, but if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, would you be willing? Would you want somebody to email you, or would you want somebody? If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, Coach, how would you recommend them doing that?
Well, I got so many coaches that I'm close to, got my phone number, so I think that would probably be a little difficult. But I think, you can share my email with them.
I will.
Again, the neatest thing about being with Troy and you guys is that you give me a chance to share what I've been taught. And this game, I think, is all about sharing and making it better, because we got the kids that we have to help that are playing this game. And the better, coaches we have, the more knowledge coaches have, the better understanding they are in terms of dealing with this new group of millenniums. It's real important that the older coaches share what they've been taught. So anything that I've learned, I want to share with everybody. It's a thrill for me to even have an opportunity to do this, because, like we said in our earlier conversation, how many guys, I played for a great high school coach, and then I go to North Carolina with Dean Smith and Frank McGuire, and then I played for an unbelievable AAU coach named Hank Vaughan, who happened to be one of the Olympic coaches for Mr. Iba. And then on the Olympic staff was John McClendon, maybe one of the most influential coaches of all time. And then Mr. Iba's the coach. Pete Newell and Bobby Knight had an unbelievable effect on me. And then so many coaches that I sat next to were unbelievable. And I see their success, and it's just remarkable, because, all the things that I was taught, I try to share with them. And then when you get older and you're able to coach in the pros, the fact that you're coaching so many unbelievably bright guys, they share things that you may never have thought about as a coach. And I can't tell you how many times a player that I was fortunate enough to coach just helped me get better and improve. And I think that's important. We share ideas. That's what's so neat about what you guys are doing. We got to be more open about sharing ideas and helping coaches become better.
Here's your next one. What would you do to improve your team's free throw shooting?
Well, that's an interesting one. I remember Coach Smith talking to me a number of times over the years. Before we ever coached every year, he used to invite all the Carolina guys to kind of a seminar. And we all went there wanting to hear him talk, but he ended up, allowing us to talk and share ideas. But I remember one time he got up and he said, one year we were really struggling from the foul line. So I made foul shooting competitive. And we didn't get a lot better. And so the next year, I didn't even talk about free throws. I told the kids, if you want to shoot free throws and you want to be a better free throw shooter, just spend time doing it on your own. And he said their shooting percentage went way up off the charts. I always used to tease Coach. I said, great foul shooting teams are usually guys that can shoot the ball. And he used to laugh at me and he said, Larry, you shot a high percentage and you couldn't shoot at all. So, but I think it's really important that kids find time to work on skills themselves. I would spend time with some bad free throw shooters, and I try to make it real simple, and, Coach always said, repeat an act that you want to see develop. So I try to simplify the way a guy would shoot a free throw if he was struggling. And the most important thing I told him is you got to shoot one way. You got to decide whether you were going to aim for the front rim or the back rim or get a general view of the whole rim. And the only guy I ever heard talk about, shooting for the back rim was Bill Sharman, and he shot over 90%. But the biggest mistake I found is bad foul shooters kept changing, and they didn't use their legs. They let their legs get straight before they released the ball. And I thought the most important thing is to get your hand in the right position. And when you do shoot a free throw, before the ball leaves your hand, your legs can't be straight. And I had a lot of guys that had a lot of success in improving their free throws. And then another thing, people think I'm crazy. I had a bad free throw shooter named Kenny Norman when I coached the Clippers. I used to make him shoot technical fouls. I did the same thing with Ben Wallace in a lot of cases to help him start believing in himself in terms of shooting free throws. And the last thing, I had a kid named Cedric Hunter who played for me at Kansas, an unbelievable point guard. And early in his career, he missed a lot of free throws. And he came to me one game and said, "Coach, why do you keep me in the game late when they're going to foul me?" And I said, "Because I know you're going to make it." And I said, "And you shouldn't feel any pressure, because if you miss a free throw, they're going to say that dumbass should have had Cedric Hunter out of the game. So just have confidence you can make this free throw, and you know that our coaching staff believes in you."
Coach, impression of European basketball during your stay in Italy, or maybe just talk about the international players.
Well, they don't pigeonhole you in terms of position. They're young guys, whether they're 6'9" or 6'10" or 5'9" or 5'10", they're doing all this skill work. And when I was in Italy, it wasn't the best situation in the world, because I thought one of the reasons I wanted to go is because they had a lot of practice time. And I was under the impression in the morning they worked on skill work, and in the afternoon they generally had a regular practice. But the thing I noticed, there's some unbelievably bright coaches over in Europe. And, at one time, everybody thought the only good coaches came from the United States. And then all of a sudden, Yugoslavia, before, it split up, they had a lot of coaches that really had an unbelievable knowledge of the game and feel for the game. I felt the time I was over there that their offensive philosophy in a lot of cases was way ahead of the way we approached the game. I thought from a defensive standpoint, maybe they weren't quite, as aware of things that we do here. And the other thing I noticed, they weren't quite as athletic as we were in some cases. And because they might not have been quite as athletic, they were much more fundamentally sound, especially in shooting the ball. The fact that they practice twice a day, these guys spend so much time on shooting the basketball. And the last thing, you didn't see a lot of guys that were true post players. They played a more open style. They relied a lot on the three-point shot, which is more than I ever was accustomed to. And they didn't really spend that much time in throwing the ball into the post. They're big guys. Generally a lot of teams played 5 out. Their big guys could dribble handoff, could pick and pop, and were usually great passers.
Coach, my next question I think is very interesting, and I look forward to hearing your answer. If you could give a younger Larry Brown coaching self any advice based on the experiences you've had accumulated over the years, what would you tell that first or second year Larry Brown?
Well, I was really lucky, Coach. My first head coaching job was the freshman team at the University of North Carolina. And every day I came early. I was an early riser. Coach Smith stayed up late a lot of times watching his players play. And then he was an unbelievable reader of theology. But I always beat him in the office. I did my practice plan. I'd hand it to him. And it was generally exactly the stuff that he taught me. And he would look at it and hand it back to me. And then every drill that I did, all our terminology was based on what I was taught from him. And then because I was lucky enough to play in the ABA for some great players and play industrial league ball and, play for some great coaches there, I had this thirst for knowledge. I wasn't an innovator. I sit down with so many guys and they'll show me stuff that is so far over my head and they're really brilliant. But I would tell everybody to try to learn as much as you can by watching video. Like you guys, you have so much video out there about drills and, about offenses against zone, about defenses, pressing, how to break a press. I try to get as much knowledge as I can, but never lose this thirst and being inquisitive. And pick as many people's brain as you can and be as around the game as much as you can, because we owe it to the kids that we teach. But I was lucky. I never put in anything that I didn't feel I could teach well. And when I went to a clinic, I never went to just find out a great 3-point play or an out of bounds play or, an offense. I went to learn how people teach and how they related to the kids they were teaching. So from my point of view, I would go to as many, clinics as I could to hear people I wanted to hear. I would watch as much old film as I could to realize there are a lot of things fundamentally that we're not doing today. And I would have a network, and of people I could bounce things off. Because one thing, I remember when I was young, I was invited to a forum with George Raveling and Terry Holland and a bunch of coaches. They met every year, a group of 7, and they would invite, people in that they were interested in hearing their philosophy and the way they approach teaching and coaching. So, but to me, and I don't want to sound arrogant, I learned from some of the greatest coaches ever, and I don't think I would change anything I would do in terms of learning. The thing I would change is to try to figure out how to deal with the different personalities now, and also how to be a little bit more sensitive to the amount of practice time I had players that were playing multiple minutes. I think I needed to be a little bit more sensitive in that regard. And then the last thing is a lot of people that have coached with me, say I used to stop us too much when we scrimmaged, because I was so concerned about not pointing out a mistake we might make. And Coach Smith used to tell me the same thing, that he had that problem. But I think I should have done a better job of being sensitive about the physical welfare of the coaches. I think I should have given them, the players, more of an opportunity to go up and down the court 5-on-5 and try to be teaching them while they're going through a mistake or something that they needed to do better. I think I was way short in that. And then like I told you the last thing, I look back on my career and there's some players that I felt I didn't do a good job with because I didn't understand their personalities. And I really feel bad that I think I could have done a better job in helping them become better players.
Coach, reading materials. Do you recommend any reading materials for new coaches? I got right beside me. I know you can't see it. But I got a book, The Multiple Offense and Defenses by Dean Smith. It's the greatest book. Hey, wait a second. That's my book.
I have two of these, one he autographed, and I can't find it. And then this one. And I guarantee you, I look at this book and I read it once a week. You know, Bob Spear and Dean Smith collaborated on the book. I think it took Coach almost 20 years to write this book. I think that's incredible. Another book I think is great is a book called Stuff by Dickie DeVinzio. I ended up at Carolina. We recruited Dick, and I thought he was coming to Carolina. He went to Ambridge High School and played for his dad, who was a phenomenal coach. He ended up going to Duke, and Dickie and I became really close. And then I'd read a book by Pete Carell called The Smart Take from the Strong. You know, neither one of the two books I mentioned are technical books like, you know, Coach Smith's and Coach Spear's book. But I think that's really, really important. And the other thing, you know, I think when you value a coach, try to find out as much about that coach as you possibly can. I'm reading a book by Mike Lombardo about Gridiron Genius right now, and it's all about Al Davis and Bill Walsh and Bill Belichick. And I'm learning a lot, you know, in that regard from those guys. But my big thing, especially this time of year, aside from listening to your clinics and all the bright people you're having on that are sharing ideas, I try to find as much video about coaches that I really admire. I tell all these guys that are calling me now, if you want to improve on zone offense, go watch teams attack Syracuse's zone. If you want to try to figure out how you can combat, you know, the pack line defense, what Tony made so famous, is figure out how teams play against Virginia. You know, one of the things, I remember watching a game that Mike Krzyzewski coached against Virginia, and they did a full court press against Virginia, not to steal the ball, but to make it limit the amount of time Virginia had to run their offense. And I told a lot of guys, a lot of times, you know, great defensive teams control the tempo with their offense. But to me, the biggest thing is don't be afraid to look for other ways of doing things, but don't put them in to what you're trying to accomplish unless you feel like you can teach it better or teach it well. Because that's the most important thing. When you go to practice every day, the drills you use, I think, have to be basketball specific for the way you want to play. You know, and repeat an act that you want to see repeated, or, compliment an act that you want to see repeated. But basketball specific drills, to me, for a young coach, is really, really vital. And don't be afraid to steal ideas from other people.
Coach, this one leads right into Troy's got it, something he has in his office. What do you think about the 1986 team at KU, and how would it stack up to today's teams? And then also they ask about Ronnie Kellogg. They want to know about a story about Ronnie Kellogg.
That 86 team was as good a team as I ever coached in college. And that, at that time we didn't have the 3-point shot. And if you remember, that team had Ronnie Kellogg and Calvin Thompson, and they could really, really shoot. And we had a presence with Greg Dreiling in the middle, and we had Danny Manning. We lost in the semifinals to Duke. Archie Marshall, one of my best players, tore an ACL in that game. We had 3 guys foul out. Danny played 20 minutes and scored 4 points and fouled out of the game. And we lost in the last seconds. Danny Ferry, we had a pretty good block out, and the ball bounced a little high, and Danny Ferry made a layup, and we ended up losing the game. But I got so many Ronnie's stories. I remember one time we said we were going to practice from 10 to 11. And it was during the NCAA tournament, and he showed up at 20 to 11. And everybody on the team was saying, Ronnie, we had practice from 10 to 11. And he said, yeah, I'm here early. I remember one time we were in a big timeout, and Ronnie looked at the scoreboard, and it was 43-43, and he thought it was an omen because his number was 43, and he told me he was on fire, and that was just proof of the fact that he was going to make every shot because he saw his number on the scoreboard. He at one timeout said, Coach, what are we running the next play? He said, well, I'm getting confused, but he got confused between a statement and a question, and a lot of the guys on the team had to tell him he was making a statement instead of asking a question. But he was one of the greatest shooters, I've ever been around on that level. He got drafted by the Lakers and is now working in Louisiana teaching kids how to shoot the ball. But he was a character. I inherited him, from the great Ted Owens.
Troy, you got a couple questions. I want to see that shirt, Troy. You got to show the shirt.
Okay, Coach, can you even see us anymore?
Oh, that's right. He can't see it.
No.
Later. Follow up on the Kellogg is, I grew up in Topeka, and one of the big things that my dad we'd always went to the Big 8 tournament. And that first year at Kansas, Ronnie Kellogg didn't play a whole lot, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Well, I inherited a team. Coach Owens, I think he was there 17 years. I might be wrong. Maybe it was 19. But Ronnie came from Omaha, and I don't think he played a lot early in my first year there. We ended up struggling early, and then we ended up beating Oklahoma, who was 1, 2, or 3 in the conference tournament and went to the NCAA. But I inherited Ronnie, Calvin Thompson, and Greg Dreiling. And that my first couple of years at Kansas, we played a lot of zone, and I didn't know zone from Adam, except for Coach Smith's point zone. And I remember Coach Newell And Bobby Knight came to my practice, and they said, Larry, how much practice do you do against the zone? I said, well, usually the day before we play a team that plays zone, we put in a terrible zone and practice against it. And they both said, Larry, you got to look at your schedule. If 50% of the teams play zone, you better give enough time in practice to attack a zone. So by them telling me that, we put in the Coach Smith's point zone, even though most of our practice was, man-to-man defensive principles, shell drill, 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4 full court. But we did have a zone period, and as a result, we became a team that attacked the zone much better than any other teams I've ever been associated with, because we had a good zone to practice against.
A point that's going to lead into my question, but you kind of touched on it a little bit. What I was going to say about Ronnie Kellogg was that first year, I don't remember him playing a whole lot. I mean, just minutes here. But in that Big 8 tournament championship game against Oklahoma, he took the shot with the game on the line. I couldn't believe his confidence to take that shot and make it. It was an unbelievable game. I still remember to this day. So
yeah. Well, I remember, Oklahoma had Tisdale at the time, who was as good a college player as we might have ever had. And they had one of the most underrated coaches, I think, that a lot of people don't talk about, Billy Tubbs. The year we beat him, I think in '88, they averaged over 100 points a game in college, which was pretty incredible. But Ronnie believed that the basket was a bathtub. There wasn't a shot he would take that he didn't think was going in. He had unbelievable confidence in that. And hopefully, that was a long time ago, but hopefully as a coach, I didn't kill a guy's confidence to take a big shot. I would always hope I was honest to tell them the things that they did well and the things they needed to improve on. And I always used to, emphasize, to me, the guys that we valued the most were the players that made other people better. And, hopefully we would be smart enough and direct enough to tell them the reason you're playing is because you do A, B, and C. And it generally was that they tried to guard, they played unselfishly, they valued their teammates, and they tried to make everybody around them better. And I wasn't afraid to tell a guy that, I don't want you shooting the ball, but you're going to play as much as you possibly can because you add so much to our team in other areas. But I said, if you want to shoot the ball, show us every day in practice that you can make a particular shot, and then you'll never have a problem with us allowing you to do that.
With your first 7 years in college, 2 at UCLA and then the 5 at Kansas, you talked about that first UCLA team kind of building up and making a run all the way to the championship game. That first year at Kansas was a build-up, and by the end of the season, you were playing your best ball. Was that a strategic thing? It seemed like your teams always just continually got better through the year and then really played well in the postseason. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I think, it's your values. When early on in my career, we talked about this before, we could practice 4 hours. And that was just the typical practice. I was so afraid that we would go into a game and wouldn't be prepared. So, our practices were long. I don't know if the guys loved it or not, but I think the most important thing is, I had to get the kids to trust our staff and the things we were asking them to do. I think early on when we talked about this the last time, every day you could read on the board, play hard, play smart, play together, have fun. And then, Coach allowed me, Coach Smith, to say it'd be nice if we defended and rebounded. Those values were instilled in us every single day in every practice. And what I talked about before is every drill we did was basketball specific. And the last thing, the fact that I took over so many programs, and, most of them were teams that have lost, we had to figure out how to put our players in the best position to be successful. And that took time, and, we lost a lot of games, maybe early in the year that if I'd have done a better job, maybe the outcome would have been a little bit different. But the values always stayed the same. I told you before, Tim Jankovic and I used to talk about this. When we could win a game and shoot in the low 30s, that was a signature win for us, because then we knew we defended and we rebounded like crazy and did all the little things that helped us overcome a terrible shooting night. And I always said the kids that are willing to play hard and play unselfishly and guard are generally the kids that allow you to coach them. And, hopefully, because I've always been blessed with unbelievable staffs, because we coach, so hard from day one and stuck to our values, I think our teams got better. And the last thing, we didn't, if we won a game, we didn't talk very much about the game, other than one of the reasons we won is because we stuck to the values. If we lost the game, unless we were selfish or acted silly, we never talked about the loss. We talked about the next day and what we needed to get better. We didn't harp too much on the loss. I heard George Raveling talk about that in great length years ago, and I've tried to understand all the coaches that I played for, and the ones that I admired the most. They didn't spend a lot of time talking about a loss. They just talked about things we need to do better. And that was quite obvious after we came back from a game and what we were going to work on.
Coach, could you talk about your philosophy of zone offense, continuity versus set plays? And then Troy's I got to jump off for another conference call for a couple minutes. Troy's going to take you for a while and go through some of these great questions that are on the message board. But talk about continuity, zone continuity or set pieces versus zone defense. Thanks, Coach. I'll be back in a little bit.
All right. Well, typically of me, when we played against a zone, I never thought we could make an outside shot. And when we would put in a zone, I thought the other team would make every outside shot. So, I was psycho about that. But when I played on the Olympic team for Mr. Iba, our man-to-man offense was kind of a passing game, where we had at that time people were playing two bigs. We had Mel Counts and Lucius Jackson and, a number of bigger guys. When I played for Mr. Iba, we played a high-low offense with three perimeter players, and they were free to move around, and the high-low guys worked together and the perimeter guys worked together. But the point guard, his job was to be one pass away. So when I came back from the Olympics, I told Coach Smith about it, and naturally he made it better, and he called it passing game. and eventually it became the 5 game at Carolina. So we ran against the zone a lot of passing game with a low post and a high post, both guys interchangeable. And it was more freelance, but we had 3 or 4 plays, that we used in a zone offense. And, most of those plays were either to get an outside shot before the 3-point shot was taken, but to try to get the big guys to handle the ball. And then we had a lot of lob plays, which we tried to understand. But it was a combination. Our zone was a zone offense that was, people would say it was freelance, but there were a lot of rules. But we did have zone plays. And, and then, I look back on it. A lot of teams, when I was coaching at Kansas, they would play box and 1 or triangle and 2 against us. And we used to have some things where we could, attack those. I remember specifically with Ronnie and Calvin, a lot of teams played us the triangle and 2, and we inverted the triangle. We would put 2 guys up top and 1 guy in the bottom, and the 2 guys that they were playing man-to-man, we gave freelance to move and set screens. But, the biggest thing I always thought about it was my biggest rule was when you leave a spot, you fill a spot. You don't stand. The only time we would stand against the zone was early on against the 2-3 zone. We used to call it hot potato, and we used to move the ball quickly with the big guys interchangeable. But generally, it was more like a passing game and a freelance kind of style in offense where we moved the ball as quickly as we could. And when I said again, when you leave a spot, you fill a spot. And the good shooters take good shots and understand that the biggest weakness against the zone, to me, is the board. And we were really conscious of rebounding the ball against zone. And that had to come because we took good shots. But one of the biggest negatives, for us, and I don't think I ever mentioned this before, but in transition, my teams, we always guarded whoever was guarding us, even though it was a different matchup we might have. Because, I thought if somebody's guarding us and they're in transition, we're going to be close enough to pick up early or set our defense. We had the hardest time, in transition defense when we played against the zone because we weren't, close to the men that were possibly guarding us. So our biggest thing was to get the basket covered and the ball stopped as quickly as we could and to try to get in front of the ball.
Coach, we have a question here. Yeah, absolutely.
Did that make any sense?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I have a question here from Coach wanting to know, how did you handle really talented players that might not be team first and get them to buy in?
I don't know if I handled that well. I tried my best to let them know that, basketball is a team game. And when you have team success, generally the best players get the most credit. And I was fortunate again to coach very few guys that didn't buy into that. And when your best player, accepts your coaching and understands the importance of being, a team player, it's much, much easier to coach. But, you can't be afraid to coach these kids and tell them. You know, the unfortunate thing now is you might tell a great player who might not be buying in all the right things, and his teammates may be reinforcing it and your assistants as well. As soon as he leaves you, he's got all his social media to deal with, or all these other outside people telling him that, you know, the coach isn't using you right and this and that. So my thing, a couple of things I told guys, I'm going to reward you based on how hard you work, how you make your teammates better, and your willingness to try to defend without exception. And for the most part, you know, those were the guys that played. And I think most kids want to be coached. And the hardest thing that we can get kids to understand is that they trust us and they know we have their best interests at heart. And I think in the long run, you know, if you embrace that, if you show them that you care and you know that you're willing to be there for them and you're going to help them become better, they'll buy in. Look, Walter Davis averaged 13 points a game for Coach Smith and was an early lottery pick, and I think he averaged 27 when he went to Phoenix. You know, Michael didn't score a lot. I remember Coach Smith very rarely recruited the highest scoring guys around. You know, there were cases surely that he did, but he had values in who he was going to recruit. John Calipari, if I remember, you know, Anthony Davis went first in the drafts, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist went second, and they were the fourth and fifth, you know, high scorers on their team. You know, Roy, you know, very rarely had guys that scored a lot of points. Bill Self, Mike Krzyzewski, we can go on and on. But they weren't afraid to coach these kids and make them aware that, you know, team success is all that really matters. And I think most kids want to be coached and want to have the coach believe in them and want to do the right thing. But don't be afraid to coach them.
Well, you had to do a little coaching with Danny Manning to get him to be a little more selfish at times, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a lot of guys like that, but that was true. You know, we won in '88 because all of a sudden Danny understood, because we were so limited. We lost a lot of guys because of injury. We lost Archie Marshall again, our second best player. We lost a couple of kids academically. We had to bring in 2 football players. And Danny just took it upon himself, because his teammates and everybody around him, you know, try to make him understand the only way we had a chance to win is that he started to become a little bit more involved in trying to be, you know, a scorer for us to be successful. Now, that never took away from all the other great things he did. Reggie Miller, when you look at the NBA, I think Charles Barkley and Reggie Miller probably have taken the fewest number of shots for the amount of points they scored. You know, I couldn't get Reggie to shoot the ball enough. When I took over Detroit, I thought Chauncey was too offensive-minded. And I asked Chauncey to sacrifice in, you know, not taking as many shots as he did in the past. But he was an unbelievable shooter and could score, you know, as well as any point guard. But, you know, in order for our team to be great, you know, he had to do that and make that sacrifice. Rasheed, I couldn't get to shoot enough. Ben Wallace, nobody ever allowed Ben to shoot. And I thought anybody that worked as hard as Ben did and contributed in so many ways that Ben did, I insisted that he shoot the ball. But I think the important thing is you got to be real with these kids and, you know, develop a trust and let them know what their role is, and don't be afraid to let everybody know what their role is.
Okay. How were your practices structured, Coach? Versus, how much time was spent on skill development, defense, offensive, shooting, etc.? Or it vary?
Not enough shooting. When we would have a water break, we would have, a shooting drill, and we used to have 3 or 4 water breaks, and I used to put 3 guys out on the court on both ends with 2 balls, and we would work on, our shooting, and most of it came off a jab step and a dribble drive, and then 1 or 2 bounces and a mid-range jump shot, and then everybody bugged me that we had to shoot a 3-point shot. But we encouraged our guys to come in early to shoot and stay late and shoot, and always had our coaches around there with them. But our practices, I don't think anybody that's ever worked with me would ever say we spent enough time during our practice to shoot the ball. I would think 75% of our practice was on defense, and in some form, whether it was transition defense. We spent 20 to 25 minutes a day running shell, both full court and half court. We spent the beginning of practice going over out of bounds underneath, our press offense and scripting it. We spent time on, late clock situations, at the beginning of practice after we stretched. And generally, I hated, we used to at one time call it dummy offense. But then I was told that was offensive to players, so we called it scripting. But we used to script our plays, but we never just basically stayed in one end. If we ran a play, we would run a play and then get a rebound and run a transition back down the other end, and then get a rebound, and if the ball went in the basket, which it always did, we'd run back and run another play. That was basically how we scripted. But every drill we did was basketball specific. Practices as the season went on got shorter, but generally our values didn't change, and the drills we did were very similar every day. And I don't know if I was fair to the guys, because maybe they got bored a little bit. But one thing that I do know, that if you did a drill at the beginning of the year that was pretty difficult, eventually the kids would get better at it. So then you had to bump it up, because then they would get more out of it. Doing a drill and eventually learning the drill, and they become comfortable with it. They didn't have to exert as much energy by doing it. And then if you bumped it up or try to figure it out to make it more difficult, that was important. And last thing, when I was at North Carolina, at the end of practice, we might run as many as 100 wind sprints, down and back. When I was the freshman coach and assistant coach, we used to run across the court in what we called 17s or 9s, where we'd run 30 seconds, and you had to go across and back in 30 seconds. Big guys had to do it 8.5. Little guys had to do it in 9 seconds. And then when we do it a minute, big guys, you could do like a 17 or 16, and the little guys a little bit longer. But we never ran wind sprints when I became a coach, because the only time we ever ran a wind sprint is if a guy was selfish or disrespectful to a teammate or a coach. I didn't have to say anything. The older players would line them up, and then we'd run a wind sprint. I didn't think there was value in that. but Coach Smith did, and you can't, say that he might not have been as good a coach as we've ever had in our sport.
When preparing for an opponent, what would you say is the most important part in preparation phase? The opponent's personnel, the opponent's offensive, defensive strategy, or working on your own team's offensive, defensive technique?
Well, I used to tell our coaches before the year, let's find out the best things teams are running, if it was the college level or the pro level. And let's in some way incorporate that into our offense so that we would be practicing against things that we would see when we would play a particular opponent. But the focus in general was on our game, how we wanted to play, both offensively and defensively. And those values barely changed. A value might change. When we used to play against Nebraska with Mo Iba, they never ran, so we sent 5 guys to the offensive board. When we played Oklahoma, we were so afraid of their transition game that we might send 2.5 guys, but normally we sent 3.5. If a team was running something that, we didn't see very much, or they had a particular player that, we needed to take out of the game, then we might devote some time in practice to a particular thing that we needed to be aware of and do better. We spent, the day before and then a shoot around basically thinking about our opponent and things that they might do. And then I felt as a coach, it was vital that the assistant coaches handle certain teams. Like if we had 3 guys on my staff, each coach might take 7 or 8 teams and focus on that particular opponent. Because one, I wanted the players to understand how much respect I had for the coaches that were working with me, and to me, to allow them to take such a big part in the preparation we might have before we play somebody. I thought it helped the relationship between the player and the assistant coach. And then I wanted personally for my assistants to become better and to eventually have the same opportunity I did. So that really worked out really well. But again, learning from Coach Smith and Coach McGuire and Coach Hannum and people I had, had such an impact on my life. Their whole deal was our team and how we should play. And they were always focusing on that. Coach Smith never let you, if you were playing in a tournament and you might play the first game or the second game, he would never let you watch the other team. Our film sessions when I was a coach were really short because I thought kids would lose attention pretty quickly, and I never wanted the kids to be afraid of the opponent we might be playing. And sometimes, when you watch these videos of scout tapes, the other team never misses a shot, and I didn't want our guys worrying about that.
When you said you gave the assistant coaches the teams to scout, did they bring their report to you first and you went over it together, or how exactly did you manage that?
No, I trusted them.
Okay.
But they would come in and, say, hey, coach, this is an area we haven't covered. This is the way I think we ought to defend it. What do you think? And I would hope that, I would take their knowledge and what they thought was the best way to defend it and just, champion what they were thinking, because they obviously were the ones spending the time. I spent a lot of time watching our team play, and I spent a lot amount of time with my door open in my office where the kids would watch film with me individually, maybe one-on-one, maybe a couple or three players together, because I thought they got so much more out of it on a one-on-one basis. Because sometimes when you're pointing out a particular thing in front of the group, sometimes it's hard for some kids to understand that, you know, you're coaching them, you're not criticizing them in front of their peers.
I had a coach here ask, what were the top 5 venues you played in / coached in?
The top 5 venues that I coached in were the 5 venues that we had the best team. When I think about it, you know, you were watching Michael's Last Dance, but the Garden always had a special kind of feel for me growing up in New York. When I was a young boy, my brother would take me to the games, and my uncles upstairs, and you would watch. At that time, they were playing pro doubleheaders and college doubleheaders, and then the Globetrotters were playing the college All-Americans. So, you know, I used to love going to the Garden, and then I loved coaching in the Garden. And I universally, just hearing what Michael said, all the players love playing in Madison Square Garden. KU, I think, probably has the greatest college venue I think there is. But I remember I coached a college All-American game in the Palestra before I went to Kansas. And the Palestra was exactly like Allen Fieldhouse, only half the size. Naturally, being a North Carolina guy, I love playing on the road. And we try to instill that in all our players. You know, playing at Cameron was always great. Playing at IU because of the love of the game that people had in Indiana, and my respect for Coach Knight was something that was certainly a thrill for me. You know, playing and being able to sit down in Pauley Pavilion and have somebody announce that Larry Brown's the head coach at UCLA used to blow me away, because I only thought there was one coach at UCLA named John Wooden. And as silly as this may sound, when I went to SMU, I played in Moody Coliseum in the ABA against the Dallas Chaparrals. And the thing that struck me was Moody was exactly like Oklahoma State's Fieldhouse, like the University of Washington's Fieldhouse, and like Cameron Indoor. It seemed like they were all designed by the same person.
A couple specific questions. It says, our state allows 3-man workouts per day in the fall. How would you utilize that time?
Well, I never used it 3-on-3, you know, during that practice time. I always wanted our teams together, you know.
Well, this is only a three-person workout.
But if it was a 3-person workout, I'd play as much one-on-one as I possibly could. And I'd make it as competitive as I possibly could. You know, the skill work, to me, you can develop that, you know, one-on-one, obviously. It just depends on what your values are. You know, I'm fortunate I get to go around and watch a lot of people coach. And when I see them do three guys in a gym, it's mostly, ball handling drills. And, I think you can use your coaches 3-on-3. You could teach a kid how to use a screen, how to set a screen, how to make a cut, how to get open. I don't think we spend enough time doing that. We don't do that at all. And now, to me, when you see a lot of the three-man individual workouts, it's either a 3-point or a layup. And I don't know what's wrong with taking a mid-range shot or trying to get fouled, but in my mind, kids don't know how to screen. They don't know how to set a screen. They don't know how to get open, and they don't know how to use a screen. So you got managers, you got coaches. There are ways you can put them in situations where you can utilize other people that not are involved in the three specific players are using. But again, it's got to be part of what you teach and what you value. And I think that should be the way you use that time.
What is the biggest advice you would give a former college coach that's now that coaches high school players?
Well, I think you got to understand the clock eventually is going to all be the same at one time. I hope in high school and college they don't go to the 24-second clock, because I think the shorter the clock, the more talent's going to win, and we're not going to see these upsets, and the games are going to be so similar. But I would want, if I was a high school coach, I'd start the 6th and 7th grade coaches and the 8th and 9th grade coaches and the JV coaches all doing the same things I valued as the head varsity coach. And maybe on a simpler level, maybe not as advanced. But I would have everybody on the same page. If we were a zone team, start zone principles. But I think that hurts kids, teaching them zone early. But I would have everybody on the same page, from the elementary school, junior high, freshman team, JV, and varsity, everybody teaching the same. And then as a college coach going to high school, it's all about fundamentals and your values. And like Bobby Knight and Pete Newell told me, if you see in your schedule you're going to play against a lot of teams that play zone, put that time into where you put a good zone offense in, so you practice against the good one. And, you spend the time necessary to attack that, or attack the press if so many teams are pressing. But the biggest thing, I think without question, is to get down to basics when you're a coach. Things that you value, instill in them right from the beginning. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of positive reinforcement with kids. Coach Smith said, if you want to see an act repeated, compliment that act. Don't be afraid to play them, coach them, and utilize your assistant coaches. Make sure that, everybody, when you go to practice, has a particular, role to play in what you want to accomplish.
How different do you think players are today from when you first began coaching?
Wow. I think they're much more athletic than, not in every case, but the majority of kids are more athletic and stronger. I think they have a harder time accepting coaching, because I think so many people are afraid, to coach them. They spend little time playing 3-on-3, and if they didn't have 10 guys on the court, they wouldn't know what to do. They don't spend as much time playing against guys that are better than them. I was blessed from the time I was a young boy. My brother took an interest in me, and I played against his friends that were older. And then I lived across the street from a famous playground that all old great players used to come, and we played 3-on-3. Every game was competitive. If you lost, you might sit down for about an hour and not get chosen to play again. But I don't think kids play enough 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. They spend too much time playing 5-on-5, and half the time, all 10 guys don't get over half court. And whenever we played 5-on-5, if we took a shot and all 10 guys weren't making an attempt to get over half court or got over half court, that was a sure sign we were going to run. But I think deep down the kids want to learn and want to get better. But we have too many guys that they have a high school coach or a college coach or even a pro coach, and then they have their own workout coach. And I don't get that.
Is the secondary break still relevant in today's game?
I think so. I had a long talk with Wes Miller and Mike Needy. Wes Miller's the coach at UNCG the other day, and Mike is an assistant at Ohio State. And, we see so many early offenses now where guys just run to the corner, and then very few teams have rim runners. They generally have their big man as a trailer, and then they play 5 out into some kind of early offense. But I think it's imperative that you run for layups. I think it's imperative that you run on every play, maybe not necessarily to score, but to have more time to use the clock, even after mays or misses. And I think the more you run, the less likely people will send guys to the offensive board. And in my mind, if you have a rim runner, generally the best rebounder on the other team is usually their big guy. And if your guy is running every time for a layup, you're going to flatten the defense and put pressure on them and send them people to the offensive board. But I do believe early offense is great. And I think the most important thing, Mr. Iba told me to get the ball to the baseline originally because you flatten the defense out and then make sure you change sides with the ball. Now I see so many teams run into early ball screens, and I think a good defensive team, their transition defense is going to be great because they're going to take a great shot and they're going to get back and they're going to load up. So I think it's important when they load up toward the ball that you do get ball reversal and try to get an easy shot early. And if you don't, you have more time to run an offense and get a quality shot.
Coach, you've spoken not only today but the past about your staff, and how important your staff was. You've had great staffs. We'll get a question coming in. How would you handle if one of the assistants was left over, from previous regime, and you had to hire them? I mean, you had to keep them, but you didn't think they were fully on page with you. How would you handle that type of situation?
Well, I never had a good situation when that happened. Not very often. I said this earlier last time. Coach Smith, Coach McGuire, Coach Hannum, all the great ones I've been around, they used to tell me you can teach your assistants all the basketball you've been taught, but you can't teach them to love you. So loyalty is more important than anything that you can have on your staff. And I kept Jerry Hobby when I went to SMU. And very few times did I do that. Coach Smith always told me it's best to, change. But the reason I kept Jerry Hobby and the secretary is when I got the job, it was just Jaron Howard and myself. I was going to hire a coach in waiting, and Buzz Peterson and Jerome Allen and Bruiser Flint were three guys that I wanted to come and take over for me. I got a call from Bill Self, just before I got the job, and said Tim Jankovic wants to come with me if I get the job at SMU. He said, you got to take him. And, I trusted Bill, and, Tim was a blessing for me. He was a great coach. But getting back to Jerry Hobby, I would come in the office and all the players would either be in Jerry Hobby's office or my secretary. And I found out, my God, he has such an unbelievable rapport with these guys. I might be smart to keep him in the secretary. And I remember calling Matt Doherty, who I replaced. I really wanted Matt to stay with me because I had a lot of admiration for him. But I asked Matt about Jerry Hobby, and, he told me, Larry, he's the most loyal guy you'll ever find in your life. And that was one of the greatest hires I ever made. But in general, I think it's really, really vital that if you're not on the same page, the kids aren't dumb. And there's no way you can keep somebody that doesn't have the same kind of values you have and is not completely loyal to you. It isn't going to work.
Would you recommend teaching a dominant pivot foot or pivoting on both feet to high school players?
Well, I always had this rule: when the ball's in there, the foot's in the air. So, I was taught to get one foot. So when I was catching the ball, I was establishing a pivot foot. And it wasn't necessarily a right foot or a left foot, but a lot of kids, generally like, one foot. The Europeans, come to a jump stop and they use both feet. It's whatever you're comfortable teaching. I don't know if I could teach, coming down with 2 feet, even though it makes a lot of sense to me because it puts the defense in a little bit of a different position. When you have 1 foot as a pivot foot, that might impact the way you defend and your stance defensively.
You coached a lot of great players over the years, obviously. Who are some of the maybe lesser talented, role-playing players that you had that really inspired you? You really enjoyed coaching them?
Well, I have a hard time ever, singling out anybody. Everybody always asks me who are the best players I ever coached, or, who's the best defender, who's the best team player.
Yeah,
so
I was just looking at general, so you wouldn't have to put you on the spot.
All right, let me go over a team that everybody loved. I coached Philadelphia. I inherited Allen Iverson, who, we all know might be as good a talent as ever played the game, maybe as great a competitor as ever played, maybe the toughest guy that's ever played. And we try to figure out a way to bring out all the best in Allen and yet give ourselves a chance to win. And that was tough because when Allen started out with me, he was a point guard. And And I used to watch Allen play, and he was so competitive. When he got the ball as a point guard, a lot of times he tried to beat 5 guys, and the defense was all set to guard Allen. And having Mike Woodson and Randy Ayers and my brother and John Kuster and Dave Hanners, all these bright guys with me, we were all trying to kind of figure out how we could utilize this unbelievable talented guy that had this competitive spirit that he could beat anybody. I remember Coach Smith did this with me. One day I was kind of selfish in practice, and he said, took all my teammates off the court, and he said, Larry, you go play against those guys. You're trying to beat 5 guys, go play. So he gave me the ball out of bounds underneath, and I dribbled it in. He said, it's a violation. So he said, at least you need one guy that has to take the ball out and pass it to you. I tried that with Allen, and he right away, was ready to take on 5 guys. But to make a long story short, in order to utilize Allen, we had to get other people around him that one he respected, that did all the things that allowed Allen to do what he was great. So my first year taking over, we got a guy like Brian Shore. We ended up getting Eric Snow, who was the 4th-string point guard in Seattle. And Eric played behind, Nate McMillan, Gary Payton, Greg Anthony. We ended up getting him. We ended up making a trade and getting Aaron McKee and Theo Ratliff. We got Tyrone Hill. We got George Lynch, who was, an early draft choice with the Lakers, who ended up in the expansion draft going to Vancouver. He wasn't even playing, and we brought him in. And all those guys were, one, so appreciative of Allen's ability and respected how hard he played and how tough he was and how badly he wanted to win. But all those guys could defend. They all played hard. They all were never affected with Allen, taking a lot of shots. They allowed me to coach them. Sometimes I was so difficult on them, but I wanted, Allen to get the message. So I might have been a little bit harder on Eric or Aaron or Larry Hughes or Theo, or people that, I loved and respected. I had an older guy that I think should have been as good a player as we've ever seen in Derek Coleman. And Allen had so much respect for Derek. Derek allowed me to coach him, and it made it easier for me to coach Allen. But I go to Detroit, and we talk about that team. Chauncey made unbelievable sacrifices, but everybody on that team from 1 to 15, wanted to win, could guard, and respected their teammates. Rasheed maybe is one of the most underrated players I've ever seen in my life. They talk about that team not having any superstars, and I laugh when you think they had Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, Tayshaun Prince, Chauncey Billups, and Rip Hamilton. I mean, you can make a case for all those guys being superstars, but it's about building a team, and it's not all about a guy that puts the ball in the basket. It's about the guys on the team that make everybody better. And I've been blessed with that. I feel bad because there's so many names I want to name that fit that bill. And I feel bad because there's a lot of guys that, I should have done a better job and appreciate what they did do and what they did bring.
Gosh, well, I have one last question, and we'll let you go. But before that, just appreciate you taking some time again to do this with us. It's just interesting as heck picking your brain and getting your thoughts on some of this stuff. But my last question is, you mentioned earlier on in this needing a job. In May 2020, if you could handpick, what would your ideal role be right now?
Well, at one time I almost took a high school job a couple of years ago, but I had a lot of extra commitments that I didn't think I could give the kids all that they would expect from me. I want to go with one team because I don't want to travel around. I've been invited so many places to share ideas, and when I do go, I'm the one that always learns. But I'd love to be with an NBA franchise. I hate this because I don't want to sound like I'm politicking for a job. I don't need a title. I don't need a lot of money. I just need to be around young players that are coming into the NBA and I don't think are prepared to play at the level they're expected to play. I'm not against LeBron or Durant or Kevin Garnett or players like that coming from high school to the NBA because they're so extraordinary. But I'm against a lot of these kids getting drafted early and going to the NBA and they're not ready to play. You look at all these old games that we're watching, you don't see a young player playing. Guys that went 4 years like Kareem, Walton, we can go on and on. They had pretty good careers. Larry Bird went 5 years, I think. So I guess in answering to what you said, I'd love to be with a franchise where they had young players and allowed me to share everything I've been taught, not only with the young players, but the young coaches, and not feel like I was a threat. I don't need to be a head coach. I don't need to take anybody's job. I've just been so lucky in my life to be around some of the greatest players and the greatest coaches, and I want to share what I was taught before it's too late. And I don't think sitting at home is getting it done, or just going to visit a college for a couple of days, even though, I'm blessed by being able to do that I'm giving enough back.
Tom, did you have something?
No, Coach, just, hey, thank you for everything. And like I said, the open door, if you want to speak in the fall or the spring, we'd love to have you speak at one of the clinics. And then text me your address. I got the videos Coach has done. He's got all access. So if you want to see how he practices, that one, he's got skill development, how they did that, and then all the secondary and offense. So if you want to look at Coach Brown and how he coaches, he's got plenty of videos that cover all of them. Coach, text me your home address, and they'll be on the mail today.
All right. And I can't thank you enough for spending the time. I hope I wasn't offensive to anybody and make anybody feel like I know too much. I'm just sharing what I was taught.
Hey,
I appreciate you giving me that chance.
Thanks, Coach, for being on. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Have fun. Have a good day with your grandchildren.
All right. I'm going for a walk right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Coach. Thanks,
Thanks,
Troy.
Coach.
See you in a minute. Bill
Thanks,
Beeline will be on in 7 minutes. Have a great day. Coach Brown,
Bye.
thanks again.
Thank you, guys.